You guys have found yourself over in improving messaging and outreach to keep homeownership in reach. I hope that this is where you want to be, but if it's not, you may hop off and find what session you do want to be on Whova. I am Katie Biggs. I am the Director of Operations at NeighborWorks Montana. You guys probably, if you were on the plenary, just got to see me quite a bit as well. I am your room host for this breakout session. I also get the opportunity to present alongside these lovely ladies. We are so excited that you guys have joined us today. We do ask that you please mute your lines and use the chat function for questions. We will try to address all questions before the end of the session. We also have a smaller group, so we can have some discussion if we need you to come off chat too. We're open to that towards the end. Just a few housekeeping items. All sessions are being recorded. Please mute your lines and turn off your video while the presenters are presenting. Please click the chat icon, and I'm trying to multitask and talk and admit people at the same time. Please click the chat icon, select all panelists and attendees, and enter your name, organization, and location. We would love to hear where you are, so please use the chat to let us know where you come from, what you do at your organization, and where you're based out of. Each of you should have received in the mail, potentially a whiteboard paddle and marker. If you find something inspiring, exciting, or new, we would like you to write a quick adjective on the whiteboard and hold it up and let us know during the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you guys about different things that you have learned. Today, I get the privilege of introducing you to Lori Freeman of Trust Montana and Amanda Laringa of Firebrand, a consultant company. Just to set the stage for this conversation very briefly, NeighborWorks Montana received a grant from NeighborWorks America. We are part of the NeighborWorks America network to enhance shared equity housing across the state and education around shared equity housing. Oh, I'm going to mute some people. To enhance shared equity housing across the state. As we looked at doing that, we didn't know how to do that alone. And we decided that it was time to bring in a consultant and a partner who was very good at shared equity housing. So we engaged Trust Montana and said, hey guys, we have these dollars. We want to work together to figure out how we enhance shared equity housing, because as we look towards the future, we believe shared equity housing is kind of a direction that we are looking at going. From there, we said, who's doing excellent work in the state? And we engaged a few different consultants for the bid process and ended up deciding on Firebrand. They are Montana based, though we got to work with a gal who is in France full time, which is really cool. And they helped guide us through the process. So this whole conversation is going to be a conversation around what we learned through survey work, through our communications efforts. What we learned is doing a joint partnership with NeighborWorks Montana and Trust Montana, and how Firebrand helped guide us through this entire thing. So today I'm going to turn over the floor to Lori first, and Lori's going to walk through kind of what Trust Montana had done to educate folks around shared equity work, where there were gaps, and why this partnership with NeighborWorks Montana was so important. So Lori, please take it away.
I'm getting to your slide, Lori.
Thank you.
There you go.
Oh, back one, I think. Back one. There you go. So yes, thank you, Katie. I am Lori Freeman. I work with Trust Montana as their general counsel, but I was really hired initially 2 years ago to really help spread the word about Trust Montana and community land trusts in particular, and mostly through education. So I started trying to figure out how to educate people. This is not actually my slide. That's all right. So the organizations that we really needed to educate included real estate agents, real estate appraisers, attorneys, and title agents who were so integral to making sure that community land trust projects worked. So I did a lot of background work, applied to all of their regulating agencies to get approval to teach courses so that the attendees could get continuing education credits. So that was a lot of work, doing all that background and getting minute by minute outlines of our educational programs to those agencies so that they could approve those. So that was very helpful in getting people to attend the educational presentations that we did, but we were kind of shooting from the hip to spread the word. I mean, we were just like putting it on Facebook. We were emailing everybody that we knew, trying to spread the word. which again was kind of just shooting from the hip and not particularly well organized. Despite all that, I have to pat myself on the back a little bit because last year, Trust Montana educated over 800 professionals all across the state. So we were pretty proud of that fact. But as we were offering all of this education, we realized that it could be improved. It kind of requires you to teach the courses and to realize what you need to do to make them better. We did not have and do not have a marketing person on our staff. And so we don't have particularly, I mean, our materials are very dense as far as material, and I think they're very accurate, but don't maybe engage the audience as well as we'd like to. So we really needed some marketing help in making our slides look better and just more engaging to the audience. And the other thing is that we weren't working with other organizations. NeighborWorks Montana is a great organization for shared equity, as is Homeward and some other organizations. There's CLTs all around the state, and we were missing the opportunity to include those people in our education. So when NeighborWorks Montana approached us that they had received a grant to expand on our educational efforts, we jumped at the opportunity. NeighborWorks Montana is such a great organization to partner with, and being able to work with them for the shared equity education just really makes us all more visible in the shared equity community. And so thank you to NeighborWorks Montana for letting us partner with you and share our educational materials. And I'll turn it over to Amanda to talk a little bit about how Firebrand helped us make those materials and our outreach better.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. So it was an interesting challenge that we were faced with. So not only did, Lori mentioned that the content itself is pretty dense. As we all know, working in this particular industry, it's also very technical. It's intimidating, and you overlay that with other socioeconomic, political, geographic challenges. It's a pretty big elephant to figure out how to eat. And then double that we were working with two different brands and trying to figure out a way to help ensure that, one, we're hitting both audiences, but also having, addressing the pain points of both audiences and developing materials, tools, messaging that's going to really resonate sort of across the board. So we use design process thinking, and we overlay that with human design thinking. So the big thing that we did in the beginning of this engagement is, very much instead of coming in as, the marketing experts or the comms experts, and arguably even sort of challenging Trust Montana and NeighborWorks Montana as far as being the experts, that we needed to really be looking at and talking to like who our constituents were and who our different audiences. And those constituents in some cases are partners, like Lori mentioned, and that's a great model for partnership or train the trainer as far as reaching down to our end user, who is going to be, oftentimes the person or the family looking for a home that they can afford. And so, the process we walk through is a mix of, we're starting around this idea of, what empathy. And so really getting in sort of the shoes, as it were, of the people in these different groups. So that includes pretty exhaustive stakeholder interviews. So both within, in this case, our clients. So it would be Trust Montana, NeighborWorks Montana, but then also, a step below around partners, and then a step below around actual home buyers. We also overlaid that with surveying work and other things like social listening, as well as geographic keyword trends. So, what's the language people are using when they search, in particular geographies, et cetera. And so from there, really defining the landscape. So the landscape both of who are the people in these audiences, why do they care? Why should we care? What are they talking about? What are we talking about? Where is that gap, starting to ideate as far as like, how can we solve for that? So we'll talk a little bit about, the original thought was, launching a separate brand and sort of a standalone solution to help, streamline and solve, and realized on the surface that was a great idea. But then when we really started to, in this case, prototype or play out like operationally what that would look like, that wasn't going to actually serve our audiences the way that we wanted to, and create some challenges, as far as execution for the two brands who are trying to actually do the partnership work. So instead, how do we back it up and adjust it? So that was a fun curveball that we had an opportunity to be working through. Where we are right now and sort of the process around implementation is the messaging work is complete, the branding work, the strategy as far as deployment around education materials is done. And so now we're going to be working through the tracking and feedback, which is really going to sort of, again, bring us back to that empathy side of the spectrum of the feedback we're getting from the professionals that we're training and supporting, as well as the end users who are trying to get a home that they can afford. So from an internal audience perspective, our analysis included lenders, realtors, appraisers, employees of both organizations, and or partner organizations. And it was not quite an even split, but we had representation across the board. And in this case, the way we deployed the surveying was a mix of inclusion in newsletters through the brands, but also individual email requests from individuals inside of the organization to essentially good partners or people that the organizations felt like could speak to the brand experience inside of Trust Montana and It Works Montana. So our brand sentiment, so we deployed surveying that way. And then at the same time, in parallel, we deployed surveying to the general population in particular target markets across the state, rural and urban. And then, like I mentioned, we did things like social listening, keyword analysis, and what we came up with as far as sort of consistency around brand sentiment was two pretty in opposition. So inside of the brand, we often heard things like confident, inspired, happy, passionate, supported. So those are the people engaging with NeighborWorks or Trust Montana. On the flip, those who didn't know the brand, when we talked about things like shared equity housing or cooperatives, affordable housing, some of the words that the brand itself is typically using when we go to the website or when we're talking about the brands, was on the other side. So anxious, angry, disappointed, indifferent, overwhelmed, relieved. And while that can feel like that's a pretty big gap that needs to be sort of bridged, but there's an opportunity there, because if people inside of the organizations who are doing this work, are in the weeds of it and sort of experiencing it day in and day out, are having, their experience is this confident, inspired, supported, and the people we're trying to serve are frustrated and angry and feeling overwhelmed. What can bridge that gap is our services, but to get them into services, we need to we need to message in such a way and message sort of at the level that can help them understand what they're getting into. If we're positioning it as like they're going to get a cake, and when they show up, it's more like sort of a half-done brownie, that's problematic. And so we want to be sure that every sort of touch point from the beginning that someone is looking for something to making a referral. One of the things we also found was there was,
oops, what happened?
Amanda froze for a second. She is impulsive and sometimes has some rough internet. We'll see if we can get her back. Oh, there we go. We got you back.
Oh no.
You froze for a second.
Where did I go? When did I leave? I'm going to stop my video so my audio stays. There we go. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good. Why don't you just take it away and repeat about the last 10 seconds of what you were saying?
Okay. So bridging that gap with services, and then how do we, get people there is we need to be messaging in a way that they understand what they're going to get, and that it is in a direct relationship to sort of that experience. and that even our partners, oftentimes the work that we do can be confusing or dense or hard to explain. It's not a sort of one sentence sort of tied to this feeling of, if you reach out, you're going to have this really supported, passionate experience. It's 2 or 3 sentences, which then, when we are thinking again about the feeling on the other end of anxious and overwhelmed, that's just feeding that. So a lot of work was really looking at how do we look at bridging that gap. Similarly, to not only language, but we also looked at things like imagery. So internal to the brand, the imaging and the words, humans, relationships, support, and inspirational. Like that's typically what people inside of our organizations or partners, when they think of the brand, that's their experience. What they're not thinking about or experiencing, again, when they're having those sort of that emotional connection, is the idea of like a physical house or the building of a house. Whereas the external audience who doesn't know anything about our particular services or brand, they were really focused on that final product, so the physical house again, and less about the support and process piece, which is clearly between, when we're talking about the language differences between the 2 audiences and feelings, and then like the visual support of what they think the brands do, there's a pretty clear disconnect. Put all these fun animations together. Okay, so the internal audience in this case, support, community, family, happy, confident. When they would look at the external audience, when they're, what comes to mind when you ask about, trust Montana, neighbor works Montana, it's affordable, they're confused and or it's complicated, cooperative, which we'll learn here in a little bit that people don't actually agree on the definition of that word, shared ownership, or insufficient. So in this case, we needed to really not only clearly identify the gap, but then work to fix it. So in this case, our brand, we know through services provides a sense of community. It's really targeting families to help them fulfill their dreams, positive feelings. It's very human oriented. But our general audience didn't understand that that's the work that these 2 brands can provide them, or people that they know and love. So I don't know if I'm going to go crazy deep into the data points here. I absolutely can, but I'll pull out some of the sort of the big ones. Again, this is really highlighting that language piece and sort of the messaging component. So we had a lot of people who, they've been to education classes. That's great. So that's a service that both brands provide. Some of them, either themselves, about half, themselves or someone they know had used unique financing to purchase a home. A much smaller group had never heard of mobile home park sort of resident owned programs. That was just a non thing. When we talk about, equity housing, it was all over the board. It was a mix of affordability, community, cooperative, insufficient, multifamily. 31% said, I don't know. And so again, if we're sort of in a position where when we're in training, when we're on the website, when we're engaging just in the community, and we're using words like equity housing, unique financing, resident owned, I think there's the assumption, because we're in it all the time, that seems really clear. Just think about the definition of the words. But for the end users of who we're talking to, which are families, looking for affordable home they can afford, that it didn't make sense. And if it did, like even their definition sometimes, like multifamily, isn't necessarily what we're talking about. So similarly, when we talk about cooperative housing, we had, I don't know, at 10% hippies. That was one that made us all laugh. Again, multifamily, which, in real estate means something possibly, maybe different, multiple owners. And then in some cases, people just said co-op, which that's not necessarily a definition. So that there's a pretty big gap in understanding. And if someone doesn't understand, they're not going to make a decision. They're not going to fill out a form. They're not going to pick up the phone. They're not going to refer someone. And then again, what are some of the other things that come to mind? The individual doesn't own it. 31%, I don't know. It's used to balance the market. So you could tell in some cases that there were sort of people more familiar, but generally it was a mix of, I don't know, defining things not how we would define them, or the entertaining one that cooperative housing is tied to hippies. And then the third component, so we talked about that feeling, that, messaging, the look, feel, and then like actual definitions of words, then also looking at like offerings. So if we are going to be bridging the gap, and part of the way in which we do that is when they come and engage with our brands, we're providing services, we're providing the services that they're looking for, and also using words similar to that they would use so they understand. And so we had definitely some overlap. So you'll see, the idea of avoiding foreclosure, financing in different ways, whether it's manufactured housing, housing communities, loans. We saw pretty consistently this idea of education and counseling, but sort of the core are all of the services, at a high level, that between the partnerships and other partners sort of inside of the family of Trust Montana, NeighborWorks Montana, that we can provide or refer out. So that when we talk about, that's a pretty big gap between where our audience is and where we are and where we need to get them. But we have a very clear bridge of we can be giving them exactly the thing that they need to, be solving that pain point. So now it's how do we bake it back so that they know that and can be communicating that, and when they're engaging with us in any way that they're having that experience. So in this case, how do we move the external audience to have the same feeling about the brands as our internal audience does? And that could be those who work with us, but even people who don't necessarily know the brand, and maybe they're just getting a referral, or they're just sort of word of mouth in the community. They understand, the value of our services, the products, that our goal is making affordable and community housing solutions, accessible for everyone, and that it's less confusing, less overwhelm, and less misunderstanding.
Yeah, what if too much of a good thing today could make us miss out on life tomorrow? 1 in 5.
So moving from anxious, disappointed, and overwhelmed to relief. And we get them there because we're passionate, confident, and we provide support and care through our services. So what that looks like is, when we talked about languaging, is much simpler. So it's tying to that human component. And part of the ways we tie to the human component is in our look and feel. So that's everything from the colors you use to the photography. I imagine everyone on this call knows how challenging it can be to find like good stock photography. It's actually a really important component that just generally, but specifically because of the emotional component of this work, that people can see the photos and identify themselves in it. So one of the big challenges we had is how do we, take some of the photography we do have and make it look fresher or up to date? How do we figure out a way to get, not everyone necessarily wants to take photos or share their story in that way, but that's a really critical component, sort of that human, I can see my neighborhood in that, I can see my family in that, I can see myself. And then similarly, language. So at a high level, when we're putting a deck together, when we're talking with someone, like what are the things that we want them to be coming away with as far as what it is that we do? So emotionally, a mix of emotional and services, but it's like we're providing the support, the education, a sense of community. So you're not alone in this and you have a team behind you. And we do that by creating tools. So the tools in the form of education, we have checklists, we have, in this case, an interactive landing page where you can download particular assets and resources to we're working towards sort of the train the trainer model. And this idea of, you'll notice I said it a lot, the making it easier for Montanans to own homes they can afford. So affordable housing has both a stigma and just a bad negative taste. And again, I talked about that sort of visual messaging of using imaging, like of home, of people of real life people that live in Montana. That component is also really important. In real estate, it's both very complicated, it's expensive, it's overwhelming. And that's if you're not even, you're just working in this, sort of the industry period as an end user, as a consumer, and then adding these extra layers of making it as sort of that emotional connection. It's easier for us to start the conversation, because that kind of sort of entree of this is what we do, then you get a follow-up of like, how, or I'm looking to buy a house, but I can't in my community, or like whatever, down payment, or yeah, I read that article about the apartments in Missoula where they were trying to, put together a cooperative and we're trying to buy it from the owner. Like, what is that? And that's really like the sort of big, to be bridging that gap. That's the big step, is getting people into a place where at the high level, they can say, I understand that kind of, enough. And I can tell people when they're, talking to me or in my community. This idea of inspiration. So trying to really support, again, that idea of community. You have a team helping move out of that feeling of overwhelm and frustration and anger. And then we're really working to empower our communities and families. And so when we talk about sort of that one-liner, we guide first-time home buyers in Montana and those that serve them. So in this case, we do a lot of partnership work with the support services and education that makes homes all Montanans can afford more attainable, easy to access and to understand. And our end feel, in this case for our end consumer, and I did want to clarify that, because this is something we did talk a lot about, is in our messaging, we technically have two different audiences. So how much do we need to have two different messaging verticals? And at the high sort of umbrella level, the most important audience in this case, and the one that's going to be the hardest to get them to join us, is the end user. And so all of our sort of high level messaging is targeting them, and then which in turn empowers our communities, empowers our partners. We're all using acronyms or assumptions that you understand, X, Y, or Z, and helping provide them similarly with tools and language that end users and consumers can capture. So in this case, we want them to feel confident, inspired, and happy to be, buying a home that their family can afford, and that they were supported through the entire process. So I've been verbally dumping. Do we have any questions? I can't see the chat.
We don't have any questions, but I just wanted to make a quick point. NeighborWorks Montana had never engaged in any kind of survey work like this. We anecdotally had heard that people view us as very technical. And in some ways, that's what we try to achieve, is to be an organization that is technical. But we also want to be an organization that is approachable and works with the end user client. So a lot of NeighborWorks Montana, for those of you that are unfamiliar, our work is done very much through our partner network. It is done very much through lenders, and not the end user who might be safe and stably housed because of the work that we've done. So we really took a lot of this survey work that Firebrand did for us to heart. As we look at our messaging going forward, we're in the middle of a strategic planning process as we look to how we talk about our work in Montana and in different settings. We took some of the survey work to heart, in that our messaging needs to make us a little bit more approachable. We can still be technical and credible, but we need to be slightly more approachable. So we were really appreciative of the survey work that we did. And I would encourage each of your organizations, as you look at your own messaging and how you can improve it, to engage in some kind of survey work to figure out how people are viewing you before, because you might not even be in the know about the gaps that there are. We were not pretty surprised. We knew that it was a thing, but we were a little surprised by some of the gaps that we realized in our communication and in our messaging. So that would be my only comment. And please feel free to ask questions of Lori or I from the organizations that engaged in this, or from Amanda as a consultant standpoint as she walked us through this.
And I do have more, but
Okay. I think Lori's gonna.
yeah, it's fun to like from on the collaborative side. I think to your point as well, Katie, and it's something that I know, we spent hours in meetings talking about these things. It can feel because as individuals, like in the work that we do, we're really in the weeds. And the work is really technical, and it's important to be technically accurate, right? And to be that trusted resource and to know the ins and outs and to be able to provide that to your partners in the industry. We do a lot of work sort of in this space, like public health with CDC. We're doing some work right now with the Department of Homeland Security. And it's the same thing, right? Like they're in the scientific world. Similarly, like you want scientists to trust you and you want to be credible. But if the people you're sort of at the end trying to really serve and help can't understand, it's not it's not sort of making that movement. It's not getting where it needs to go. And that you can still have all of that technical robustness, just put it a layer, we typically say, depending, 2 to 3 layers down. So if I am technical, I'm going to click, right? Like learn more, see the research, what are the services, like what are the programs? But if I'm just maybe a general user looking for that partner referral because I need X, Y, or Z, like what am I Googling? What am I saying? And in this case, similar to like public health, these are like very emotional and personal life experiences that people are having, or know that people are having, or even as like the partner, they're in the hard conversations and they're challenged to support the end users. And so there's, again, it can feel a little bit like a tightrope, but adding that that personal component and being really mindful of, at the end of the day, who are we trying to help? And making sure that that's coming up in your messaging and up in your artwork and your positioning is really, really essential.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I agree with Katie on that, and Amanda, you as well. We were focused, or have been so focused, on educating professionals and how the community land trust projects might create some differences in what they do on a day-to-day basis for us. And that was so much our focus that we kind of did put that personal side behind us. And it is important that we make people understand what the end goal is. So you made a good point.
Yep.
So we just put together just some visual aids as far as like what that looks like in the form of assets. So in this case, I mentioned we worked through messaging. So we've gone through, Lori mentioned they have a amazingly robust training suite, but going through that, and not only in some cases, tightening the language, or not, we tried really hard to stay away from the technical, but more of some of the soft language at that high level, or like that first cover page that someone might use, like that handout. To be capturing that human experience, that softer piece. Also like how we display and deploy it. So, you'll notice there's a lot more white space. We're using a mix of that human experience with photography, as well as icons to kind of help drive that experience, whether it's in a print format or a digital format. And so I mentioned in the beginning, one of the things we had originally thought was creating a standalone brand and a standalone digital home to house all of these things, which from a general sort of marketing perspective, that is arguably a best practice, right? You can sort of build its own, you can be doing dedicated SEO work. It has its own look and feel, and then you have sort of the partnership between the two brands. In this case, when we think back of one, operationally, what can be deployed inside of these two organizations, but then also, who are we trying to help? That was a lot of extra work that was going to make it actually more difficult for us to be helping, our partners and our families the way that we really needed to be. So instead, we did not scrap, we have shelved some great branding and naming that we had come up for this standalone, and then instead brought it into this more centralized partnership look that can be deployed across both brands so that they can be using it in their trainings. They can be deploying at parts and pieces of the assets across their website, have these as print materials inside of their individual for trainings or in their offices, and then have an embedded essentially knowledge base or landing page, an interactive landing page that allow, in this case, our focus was on the training our partners. So essentially a home base where our partners could go and interact with the brands, and the interaction ranged from everything from, sort of get on the list. So as we update and provide more training, actually, identify what kind of professional you are, and then you can see what resources we have available. You can bring us in to do an actual training for your organization. And I can't remember what the fourth call to action was. There was another one. It might have been join the newsletter. So like a softer, but again, the goal there was regardless of where people are in their journey, as far as how they might interact with our brand, and again, in this case, partners, that we are actively, one, trying to engage them sort of in some way where we're getting an email so we can stay in contact with them, but making it really easy for them to sort of choose their own adventure as far as who they are, what resources they specifically need, and then being able to just capture them on the website. And yeah. Oh, and just some examples of like trying to, so this is, these are some actual, photography that we had of some families, and just a little trip, how do we do cropping around them to have like a different use case for them. These are clearly more stock photo-ish, but again, like trying to do little subtle things so it feels less like that. So in this case, it was like two different ones that we cropped around, put, in this case, we have a circle and an icon where it's like you could envision, it's less of the, kids sitting on their parents' moving boxes in the really staged photo that seems to be the very popular theme of stock photography. And that is, I know for the organizations, is a goal that we have, is to actually create a more robust and custom photo suite. So we can be moving, that all of the photos are real people in real situations in very real communities, but one, from a time perspective and also a budget perspective, that isn't always, feasible. So we did a hybrid mix in this case. I don't know what else, Lori. Katie?
That's exactly right. So that's one thing that we were not very good at, and that one of the big takeaways is the importance of photos and charts, just to make our presentations more interactive and more interesting. We've started taking some pictures. In fact, there's some in there from our project in Red Lodge that I just love, and everybody's happy. They're closing on their home. So I do find that including those is really important. That was one of the key takeaways. And using, like you said, using real live people in our projects. It is exciting. And then we can point them out when we're giving a presentation that, oh, this is the family that was able to purchase a home for $100,000 in Red Lodge or something like that. So it just makes it that much more personable.
Yeah. And I think there's also the piece of sometimes there's worry that if you're going to spend the money to do that or take the time, that it won't age. Katie, how old is this picture? A decade old?
That's actually one of NeighborWorks Great Falls' pictures that we stole from them, and it's over a decade old at this point.
Yeah. So there's something to be said about when it is very real people, and it's a family just being a family, that one will naturally overlook that. And as long as someone's not I can't even really think of what would be so like trendy in this moment that it's not going to age, over the course of a few years. And if you get in the habit, and that's the big thing, is like building it into a system where it's like, when you're doing like that, you're having these conversations with clients, like, would they be open to be photos or testimonial or maybe video at some point? And they don't have to be sort of this big, huge production with like a professional photographer in some cases. There's actually a lot of research that predominantly because of video and reels and social, that consumers trust sort of that more human, like on your iPhone or just like sitting talking to someone like on a Zoom, more than they trust a really professional grade like video. And so just getting in the habit, because then you can start to build your library that you can deploy in all sorts of places. It could be on your website, it could be on social, it could be on print collateral. So, yeah.
Since your work, Amanda, we've been very conscious of that and taking our iPhones to every event and every home closing and taking pictures of the homes and the people and asking if we can use those. And yeah, we've been very conscious of that since working with you.
That's great. Are you getting a lot of pushback about taking photos?
Not generally. There are some people that just as soon not have their photo taken. And we totally respect and understand that.
Yeah.
But for the most part, people are pretty excited to get into their home and happy to share a picture of their home, if not themselves. So
yeah,
we
that's great.
Something for every project.
I don't have too much more. Really, we've kind of thought we'd leave it open for questions or challenges or any sort of feedback that we could be, helpful around.
I also just want to make one quick note. It was interesting because both Trust Montana and NeighborWorks Montana have their own very distinct brands. And Amanda hit on this a little bit, but in Montana, we have to work so collaboratively to get work done. And so trying to figure out how we marry two different organizations with the same purpose and goal to get this done and then figure out where it lives took a little bit of negotiating and navigating for us, but we were really pleased to see the way we can co-brand organizations across the state for the common good of the work that's being done. And so I just, as a challenge you guys to look at where your work can collaborate and overlap with other organizations that are doing really incredible work, because our power is better together. And it was cool to see a partnership for two, very different brands, different organizations come together to do this and be a part of that. As Amanda said, we would love questions, love conversation, love troubleshooting with you. If there's none to be had here, you feel free to reach out to each of us afterwards. We did get, how did you collect the surveys again? Sorry, I missed it. Amanda, can you touch on how you went about collecting those?
Yeah, so technically in our case, we use a tool called Typeform. So that's like how the SurveyMonkey works, Google, what are the surveys, that tool. Typeform is a paid tool. But then how we did a deployment was through a mix of things. So we provided messaging and links to the individual brands to distribute through newsletters that they had, so their individual audience. We also provided that as a sort of individual outreach email coming from the two brands to people within their personal network. Similarly, on the Firebrand side, we've been in Montana for a number of years, so shared other partner organizations or people in the industry that I knew as far as that may or may not be NeighborWorks. I did a distribution that way. And then for the general public, we did a mix of like our social networks, but then we also did a lot of paid social ads to drive people to to complete the survey.
And I will say, this would have been incredibly difficult for either Trust Montana or us to institute on our own. It was very, very helpful to have someone else steer the ship on this. I also think it eliminated some of the bias that may come if we asked. However, we did share in our own newsletter. So I would say if you look at a survey process, potentially look at engaging someone that could help you do that. And also someone that could help you analyze the results, because that was incredibly helpful for us to have someone else synthesize that data that was collected.
Yeah, and I, in sort of today's day and age, surveying can go sort of hit or miss. We also do informational interviews where we just, in this case, we did most of our interviewing was within the brands of Trust Montana and NeighborWorks Montana. But we did some individual interviews with some local lenders of just, what do you think? What's your experience? What does this mean to you? And another really helpful tactic is to do, see what the social listening component. So that could be looking in local group, like Facebook groups or Reddit's threads, forums, comments on news stories, because you'll start to see sort of particular language being used a lot. So one thing we notice, like in the general public, they generally don't say affordable housing unless they're talking about it as a policy, and then you'll see it. Whereas if they're talking about their individual challenges or their communities or their friends and family, it's this idea of like something I can afford that we can afford. And so it's a nuance, but it's an important one. Similarly, looking at Google search trends to see like what and how we typically do that is, okay, we're hearing this language from the internal brand, so the technical team. We're running it through to see like how much search traffic is there for that actually, like how hard is it to rank. And if there's not a lot of search traffic and it's real easy to rank, that means that the general public is not really looking for that. And then using language that we're hearing in the community, like what does that look like comparatively, so that we can start to see like, okay, where are the gaps? And then also there's lots of opportunities, right? Like we identified in this case, there's a lot of organic search opportunity for both brands to be developing educational content that's forward facing, to a partner or a consumer, because there's just a gap there. It's either really technical or really focused on sort of traditional real estate, the Zillows, the realtors, the whatever. And so there's a huge opportunity to be stepping into that space, one, to own it as the authority or as an authority. But also, again, like with the end goal is getting it in the hands of as many people as possible. And we know that one of the first things people will do when they have a question or get a referral is they're going to check it out online.
We had a comment come in. I think it's either Patrick Kelly or Kelly Patrick. I'm not sure which one. This has been great. We just finished a large survey. What advice would you give us as we review the results in the next few weeks? And then the question came from when I spoke briefly, there was a change in mindset after reviewing the results. Could you or others from your team expand on your thoughts? So my biggest encouragement to you as you review the results is review them with an open mind, that the way you've been doing things might not be the way you need to continue to do things. As Kelly Lynch said this morning, we are in a new era where things are being done differently. And we needed to think through the fact that we can still sound technical, but we can sound approachable. So review the results that come in with an open mind. And in terms of changing your mindset, it's hard to create long-term cultural shift. The way we talk about our work, the way we talk about that, what Amanda had mentioned about affordable housing, that's something we've been looking at for a while, is we find that those terms are very off-putting and create a lot more kind of NIMBYism, not in my backyard, than they were before. When we talk about homes that Montanans can afford, it changes the game in the way that we approach the conversation, because when we look at, housing Montanans, we can't necessarily get all the technical language all the time. We have to look at how we can shift to make our work more approachable, more attainable, and all of that. So my biggest encouragement to you would be just to really look at your results with an open mind.
Yeah. Lori, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Oh, that's exactly what I would say. Keep an open mind and don't be so wedded to what you've already done that you can't change it. I mean, we put a lot of time and effort and work into what we've already completed. And so we can get a little defensive of what we've done. It makes it harder to keep an open mind. So don't be too tied to that.
And that is the hardest. Like we just went through a rebrand ourselves, and we've been in business for 15 years, and it's like, oh, but I loved that logo. I loved that line. Like, what do you mean? It doesn't really work that well anymore. I think the other thing when you're looking at your results, I mentioned it a little bit around some of the results we were seeing, that what, how do I say this? That like the unclear, so like the I don't knows or the answer that's not quote unquote correct or what you mean, like that is a big one to pay attention to. I feel like I often see in surveying results, right? It's part of why people always kind of balk sometimes, is sort of cherry picking those really intense ones that it's like, oh, they, 80% hated it or didn't know or whatever. And it's like, okay, that's helpful. But like that group in the middle is also really telling. And so to keep, to pay attention to that too, because where the I don't know or they're close but not quite, so like cooperative and then just the answers co-op, like that's, they're going to be easier for us to sort of communicate to and kind of bring around, because they're at least having that, I would argue, sort of attempting and or critically thinking, and or our messaging just has to shift a touch to get where we want them to go. Targeting the lowest common denominator or trying to convince everyone that, you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, that will be a feeling battle. Like it won't happen. It's going to be a crazy amount of investment that in the end won't result. And so instead, like, who are your people? Where are they just a little uncertain or it's not quite there, that we can help shift and sort of build that groundswell of those end users or partners and really lock arms and create that amazing experience. And then, other people are going to come and lock arms and join you. But
Yeah. Well, if there's no other questions, we will give you 8 minutes of your day back. We thank you for joining us for this session, and Lori and Amanda, a special thanks to you guys. It's been fun to work. And guys, just time frame context, this has been about 9 months that we've been doing this work together, 10 months almost. It's not been quick. So we just really appreciate, I appreciate working with the Trust Montana team and with the with Firebrand. So just, great work. For all of you that have joined us, remember you can always participate in the community conversations through the Whova app or chat more. I know that I'm on the Whova app. You can reach out to me if you need to. Amanda and Lori, why don't you guys drop your email addresses in the chat really fast so people can have those if you'd like to reach out to Amanda or Lori. We are now going to be on a 1-hour lunch break. We look forward to having you back in breakout sessions at 1 p.m. We hope that you find another great breakout session to attend. Just a quick reminder that the 1 p.m. breakout sessions, some of them are 90 minutes and some of them are only 60 minutes. So please be aware of how long the session you're joining is. And then don't forget tonight about the in-person networking events in all the major cities across the state. We hope that you can join us together for those as a great time for networking. We hope that you have a great time and a great lunch hour, and we appreciate all of your engagement in this conference so far. Have a great afternoon.
absolutely. Thank you.
Bye, guys.